Hey kids, it's Pastor Noah here, and I want to welcome you to Virtual Online Junior Church. I'm so glad that you've joined me, and I want to explore the Bible with you today because we're going to learn something about God. We might learn something about the Bible. We might learn something about ourselves, or we might learn something about all three of those different areas. And so I hope that you are ready to learn and explore with me. But before we do that, we have to do our theme song. Are you ready? Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Explorers. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Explorers. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Explorers. I hope you're ready to go. So if you have your Explorer gear, you can get that, whether it's a hat or a vest or a magnifying glass or binoculars or whatever it might be, and you can have that with you while we explore the Bible. Just as a reminder that we're getting into it, right? We're not just talking about, we are getting into God's Word today. And I'm so glad that you are going to join me in getting into God's Word today. So I wanted to ask you, do you remember where or what we talked about last week? Maybe I'll ask it this way. Do you remember who we talked about last week? You might think of a couple different names. There's a whole bunch of different people that we talked about, right? But maybe you remember two of them, because two of them really were at the focus of our story last week. Those two people were Naomi and Ruth. All right? Now, do you remember what book of the Bible we were looking at? It's either one of those two names. Do you remember what the book was called? Was it called the book of Naomi, or was it the book of Ruth? If you're thinking the book of Ruth, you got it. We looked at the book of Ruth last week, okay? Ruth is one of the books that's in the Old Testament. Okay, Ruth is in the Old Testament, so we are looking at the time before Jesus came. So we haven't yet had Jesus come yet. We are looking at the story before Jesus came into the world. And so we talked last week about how Naomi and Ruth lost loved ones. They both lost their husbands. And Naomi was older than Ruth. Okay, Naomi's son that's who Ruth had married. Okay, so Naomi, her daughter-in-law was Ruth. So they were related at this point, okay? And Naomi was moving back to Israel, back into the land in which she came from. And she told Ruth, remember, you don't have to come with me. It's okay. And Ruth said, you remember that one verse we looked at? Ruth said, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. And that was an awesome picture for us of how God sticks with us even when we're dealing with difficulty. Because you'll remember that Ruth and Naomi, they had both lost loved ones. They had both lost their husbands. Okay, it was Naomi's husband and Naomi's son that had died, and Naomi's son was Ruth's husband. All right, so it was odd that Ruth stuck with Naomi through that. And so we're going to kind of pick up the story this week, and actually we're going to finish it. The book of Ruth is only 4 chapters long, so we're going to look at the second part of it today. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you about, I don't think it's something you're going to know about. So you guys have never heard of something called a bridge, right? A bridge? I'm told that bridges are things that allow a road or a path to go over an obstacle and keep going. But you guys have never heard of that, right? And I bet none of you have ever even seen a bridge with your own eyes, probably, right? Now, what am I thinking? We see those all the time, right? We see bridges all the time. Some of you might actually be able to look out the window right now and see a bridge, right? Oftentimes bridges go over water, creeks, rivers, lakes. Some of them even go over bays, which are even bigger than a lake would be. Well, some of them. But they go over those obstacles, right? So the road comes up to the obstacle, and then the bridge is built to help you get over it and to continue down the road into wherever the destination is. And so a bridge is, for us today, is a really helpful thing to talk about because we're looking at this idea of a plan. Okay, I actually have a picture of some bridges here. I'm just going to show these to you, and I'll talk about them really quick here. The one at the top is the Golden Gate Bridge. That one's all the way in San Francisco. It's still in the United States, but it's in California. All right, the next one here is the Tower Bridge, this one right here. And that one's all the way across the Atlantic Ocean in England. The next one is the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge, of all the bridges that I have pictures of today, the Brooklyn Bridge is actually the one that's closest to us, or to me here in Cooperstown, New York. The Brooklyn Bridge is in New York City, okay? And then the last bridge I have a picture of is the Sydney Harbor Bridge, and that bridge is in Australia. There's all sorts of bridges all over the place, but bridges really help us to see that somebody had a plan, right? Somebody came up to this obstacle and said, we need to figure out a way to get over it, to get around it. And so they built a bridge. And when they started building the bridge, they had some sort of plan, right? So for you and me, it's important for us to think about the fact that God had a plan. When sin entered the world all the way back in Genesis, God had a plan to bring Jesus, to send Jesus to the world to get over that obstacle of sin that we each struggle with, okay, to bring us back into relationship with him. But in order to get to Jesus, we have to first get there, right? And we're not yet at the story of Jesus, but Ruth is actually she's related to Jesus, okay? And so we're going to talk about that at the very end, all right? But Jesus came because of God's plan, and we're going to see in the life of Ruth that God had a plan for Ruth as well. So so with our story last week, we have to remember where we left off, so that way we can understand sort of the obstacle this week and how there's God's plan provides a way, and how God is at work in the life of Ruth and Naomi. And so we left off with Ruth was going to a man named Boaz in his field, and Ruth was picking up extra barley so that way she and Naomi could have food, right? And so that was the way that God was providing for them. But God continues to work in Ruth's life and in Naomi's life, and Ruth goes to Boaz. And one of the really important things that we have to remember is that in the Old Testament and back in Ruth and Naomi's time, and even today, having a family name and your family's name carried on was a big deal. So Naomi had this land that belonged to her family, but if she didn't have any children or any ability to have children, then that land would be lost for her family. So she wanted to continue on that family name so that way her land would be able to be owned and to be able to be represented as a family. And so she wouldn't have that opportunity if God didn't have a plan and God didn't work in their lives. And so God works in and through Ruth and Boaz. Ruth goes to Boaz and says, Naomi said that you are a family, you could be a family redeemer for us. Are you willing to buy or to take on that responsibility? And so Boaz says, yes, I'll do it. But he said, there's somebody else that could also do it. So let me go and ask them if they want to do it. And so Boaz goes to that person and he talks to them. And this is what that other possible family redeemer says. He says in Ruth chapter 4, verse 6, I cannot redeem the land because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party had to take off their sandal and give it to the other. This was the method of legalizing a transaction, which is a really fancy way to say that this man wasn't comfortable taking on this responsibility to be the redeemer for Ruth and Naomi. And so he took off his sandal and gave it to Boaz, and that's the thing that sealed the deal. Now, we look at a story like that and we say, well, that doesn't really make a huge difference. That's just a silly story about a family being able to keep their land and allow their name to continue on. And that's true. To some extent it is. But we see a picture in there of Jesus because God had this plan for Ruth and Naomi, and he provided Boaz. And if Boaz didn't step in, Ruth and Naomi would have lost that land for their family, just like God had to step in. He had to send Jesus Christ to come in to this world and to step in and help you and me to save us from our sin. And one of the cool things that I mentioned in the beginning of the video that we'll come back to, here's our story picture, is that Ruth and Boaz get married and they actually have a kid together. And this child that they have, which is a picture right here of this child, the child's name is Obed. And at the very end of the book of Ruth, one of the cool things that we see is that Obed, he has a son, and that son's name is Jesse. And Jesse has a son, and that son's name is David. Okay? And that's King David. So we get Ruth and Boaz have a child. Okay? They have a child. His name is Obed. And then Obed has a child, and his name is Jesse. And then he has a child, and his name is David. And so if we started our story with Naomi, right? And so we see these generations in which God has provided. And you all know, maybe you don't, but Jesus comes from the line of David. So if God didn't step in and continue the family line for Ruth and Naomi, our understanding and the line of Jesus, the family of Jesus, would have been completely different. How amazing is that? That all the way back in the Old Testament, we see Jesus and his line and his family being talked about and being seen as an example of how God stepped in and created a way for help when somebody needed it. Naomi and Ruth needed help, and God was at work in their life. You and I need help, and God can be at work and is at work in our lives. So I want to encourage you this week, look for those opportunities where you see that God is working in your life, and look for opportunities where you can be at work in the lives of others, how God can use you. So thanks for listening this week. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'm praying for you, and I'll see you next week. Bye.